Gosh, welcome, 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 welcome. How incredibly exciting to the first ever Yeo Valley Organic Garden Festival. I'm delighted to say that you've all got tremendous taste and have picked the day with the most sunshine and the least rain, so congratulations, that's a win for a start. The most important thing is obviously to have a lovely day and be incredibly inspired, and to also know that this incredible festival is spread beautifully around the entire 6 acres plus. So there are fabulous things as you go. There are jewels that you will find as you round the next corner. It's not just this bit, and you've all got maps, I'm sure, but just to know that keep going. There's gorgeous traders selling beautiful plants. There's the book tent. There's the several stages. You can have your soil sampled if you bought it with you in the greenhouse next to the cafe. But there's jewels. There are jewels around every bend. So keep walking, keep exploring. And there's the most incredible organic garden to see as well, if you haven't been here before. So, yeah, have a lovely explore. We are here thanks to the vision of Sarah and Tim Mead, who had the idea to put this festival together, and an incredible team that have done the work. And also to Rocket Grow, who are peat-free compost, who are just outside this tent. So thanks to all of them. That's why we're here, being inspired and getting excited. From a housekeeping purely basis, there are 2 fire exits if anything happens. And you probably came in via them. So, without further ado, I shall introduce the most magnificent Alys Fowler. As you know, she's a gardener. She's a writer. She's currently doing a PhD in Kiel about peatland conservation. And because she had a spare 5 minutes, she's also starting a nursery simultaneously. But today, she's talking about perennial veg. So we will do about half an hour of Alys and her slides, and then there will be time to have a little chat at the end, and there'll be roving mics and all of those things. So if you've got questions, hold them in your head, and we'll have a chance at the end. Thank you very much.
Grand. Thank you. So I will be honest, this is my old garden. Nobody gets to come into my new garden. So this garden is a typical terrace in Birmingham. So it's long and narrow, southwest facing, sloping, and then it had 2 apple trees and a magnolia at the bottom. So the bottom was in deep shade and the top was in very hot sun. And it really is a narrow, small back garden. It doesn't look quite like it does in this picture now, but I'm happy to say quite a lot of things have survived from lovely Carl not really gardening for 5 years. So I am really into polyculture, which is this idea of growing everything together. So a monoculture would be a single row or a block or a field of the same thing, whether that's carrots or cabbages. And polyculture is everything in together. So the point of the garden was, and my new garden exists in exactly the same way, in a slightly different formation, which is that the majority of plants in there, let's say over 70%, has to be edible, and the rest of the plants have to be good for pollinators, good for soil system, or some level of herbal medicine. So as you can see, it's incredibly densely planted up. And in order to make it a good polyculture, it's almost essential to have perennial veg in. The point of perennial veg is that they bring a whole new element to the ecosystem. So if you are only ever growing annual vegetables, and if you're not seed saving, what you're doing is only seeing a very short part of that plant's natural life cycle. You're essentially eating it before it gets to live out its entire cycle. and set seed. And so what you're doing is always withdrawing a lot from the soil. If you're eating something from your garden, you are taking from your soil. And traditionally, that was balanced out by putting a huge amount of compost and manure and food back into the system. I am very keen, for many different reasons, to not have to keep feeding the soil. It comes at quite a cost. You have to buy that stuff in. Even if you're making your own homemade compost, you will probably at some point buying food in. But also because I believe we've started to make a kind of an obese soil system. So we have become hell-bent on nitrogen, potassium, and phosphate, and we hold them up as if they're the only thing the soil needs, when actually the soil needs a whole wealth of other things. And perennial plants, because they are perennial and they're going to come back year after year, their root system is going to excite the soil into using a different part of its system, which will then have an overall benefit to the whole garden. But long-term benefit, your garden will store more carbon the more perennial plants it has in it. Every time you disturb your soil, you're disturbing the carbon cycle. So how this works is you need to get, I think, at least 30% perennial plants into the veg garden, and if possible, even more. And of course, if it's perennial, you really have to decide where it's going to go, because you can't move it every year. So you have to decide where these plants are going to go, and then you're going to have to understand that around these plants, things are going to behave differently, because a perennial plant is working on a longer life cycle, so it's going to take things from the soil at a different time from the annuals. So my garden started off looking like this. This is, I think, 2009. It was just a sea of gravel in the middle of Birmingham. They thought they'd have a beach garden. Underneath the sea of gravel and underneath that patio was a whole ton of concrete. Don't know if there's a body there, but they were sure getting rid of something. I basically dug a huge channel in the middle of the garden to make the path, so you can see the path there, and poured all that gravel into that channel. So it's sort of a river running down the middle of the garden. I did this because it was a typical terrace back garden on a slope, and there was only a narrow side entrance, and there was no way I was wheeling up a hill all of that gravel out. So I decided everything had to stay, and the quickest way was to do that. And then I took what I'd taken out and put it onto the beds, and then I got rid of, underneath all that gravel was a thicket of mare's tail root. I've never used any chemicals. I got rid of the mare's tail by increasing the organic content of the soil and by shading it out. Mare's tail needs sunlight to do well. If you just shade it out, it will disappear eventually. But essentially how I got rid of any of the problems that were coming in, and this is how I've treated the next garden, is I do a form of lasagna gardening. So I cover the soil with either newspaper or cardboard, whatever organic matter I can get my hands on, whether that's seaweed or coffee grounds or spent hops, you name it. And I build up a layer in the autumn, and by spring that's slightly rotting down, and that's how I would start a garden. I only do that to start the garden. I don't do that year on year. So there you go. There's my lovely old dear Isabel, no longer with us. But that's how it worked at the bottom of the garden. Layer of cardboard, make sure the cardboard's wet, put organic matter of whatever nature on top of it. And at the bottom of the garden was 100% pure bindweed. So I don't dig. If this, apart from digging that huge channel down the middle, I haven't dug anything since. I don't believe in digging. And because I'm mildly eccentric, I mostly garden barefoot, because I feel that it's really important to move through the garden with a kind of gentleness. And if I don't have shoes on, I can't dig, I can't jump around. I have to be really careful about my feet, and therefore I move carefully over my soil. And it may sound eccentric, but I'm a happy person, so I don't care. So here you can see this is in Gardener's World days, where I will be really honest. I stole tons of plants from Gardener's World when people were looking. So most of the plants in that shot were from leftover shoots. And this is what it looked like just as I left. So it got more crazy and more intense and a lot more food. And so there, you can, within this system, you can see that there's like some sedums. I know they've had a name change, but let's not bother with that. So there were things in there that were 100% for just bringing in pollinators. It's really important, if you care about the insect life in your garden, that you don't just feed them for one big bang of a month in the summer. You have to establish them coming into your garden all year round. So you need early spring bulbs, you need early spring flowers, you need late spring flowers, you need early summer flowers, you need mid, and on and on and on and on, and then you need something flowering in the winter. Because they need to think of you as an all-round buffet, and if they think of you as an all-round buffet, everybody else, the birds, will come, because they'll think, oh, this is, everything has a memory, and everything has a pattern, and everything has a mapping system. And if they've already got you on their map, they will come back month after month, day after day, and then you will have a happy ecosystem. In a happy, healthy ecosystem where you are not spraying, you should expect pretty much everything to be nibbled. But that doesn't matter. You can eat a lot of nibbled food, and as long as there's enough food for you and enough food for the thing that's nibbling, it's not actually a problem. So you really have to rid yourself of this notion that you are going to produce supermarket quality, blemish-free. It's not important. In fact, there's a lot of evidence to show that all the blemishes is where the flavour is. So you can, if somebody says, oh, a slug has nibbled this, you say, yes, they have exceptionally good taste. And the plant has responded with secondary metabolites, and we know that secondary metabolites are very important to our health. No, do it. It'll shut them up. I also used to have, I no longer sadly, but I used to have an allotment where I would experiment with lots of different plants in this polyculture system. So you have these kind of group perennial vegetables, and I'm going to get onto them quickly. But then what you're going to do is have to experiment to find annuals that can cope with perennial company. So many of our annual vegetables have been bred for a cycle of growing on monoculture and on large-scale monoculture, so we're talking about field scale, that they are really used to having equidistant spacing or row spacing. They're used to being watered and fed. They are very needy plants. And so often when people say, well, you can't really grow a ball cabbage in a polyculture system, I'm like, yes, you can grow a ball cabbage in a polyculture system, but you have to start to breed your own ball cabbage. Now, that's another day. It's not as complicated as it sounds. But what you have to do is experiment with finding lots of different varieties and working out which is the one that's going to work with you. So you have to go on a journey of curiosity rather than imagining that all of the vegetables, annual vegetables, will like being next door to your perennials. And just to give you an example of what and how this might look, in this picture, you have the sedum that's had the name change, which I can't be bothered to remember. That's the pink thing. And then below it is an Alchemilla mollis, or a lady's mantle. I use those a lot because they're good in herbal medicine. They're exceptionally good plasters there and then on the day if you decide to chop your finger off. And they're particularly good for pollen. Well, they're not particularly, but they're not bad for pollinators. Next door, you can see a lettuce. The lettuce probably doesn't look like a big fat lettuce that you might in a traditional veg garden. I just harvest the outer leaves of the lettuce over a 14-week cycle. It means I only sow lettuce twice a year, maybe 3 times a year. And I keep those lettuces going for a full 14 weeks. So I never harvesting a whole lettuce. I've just got them dotted about, and I take a few leaves off each one. That means you can grow a very narrow lettuce, which doesn't mind being in such a compact system. And then next door to that, you have some sort of squash, can't remember what, but it looks happy enough, so we'll be pleased with that. And behind that, you can see rhubarb. Now, you're all growing perennial vegetables already, because I guarantee you already have rhubarb in your garden. Rhubarb's a beautiful, handsome, very architectural beast. So it's a nice one to put into a system, but it doesn't have to be, I mean, I bet your rhubarb is in its worst position down in a slightly, in like, oh, well, it's neglect, we don't like the soil, so we'll put the rhubarb in it. I think that you should honour your rhubarb and put them in really good soil and get fantastically good quality stems off them. And then behind that, and I have to say it does look a little chlorotic, but plants are allowed to have their moments. So up against the fence, you can see a Himalayan raspberry. So it's a very pretty raspberry with tiny little fruit that is less of a beast than our cultivated conventional one. And then there's more things hidden behind them. What I'm sort of trying to say in all of this is that you don't have a huge bed just of perennial veg. You have them dotted through the system. You have them along the margins and at the back. You could just have a single bed of perennial vegetables, but you would be keeping all their benefits just to that bed. Whereas what you want to do is dot them through your system so that the benefits of their root system and what they're bringing to the soil is passed on to all their neighbours. You can be inventive. We eat quite a lot of dahlias. I never lift my dahlias, so I experiment a lot to find ones that can cope whatever the weather, really. Every now and again, I lose them over a winter, and I regret that, but then I have to start all over again. But I want tough beasts that will just come up. You can eat the tubers. The pink varieties tend to be bigger tubers, but the yellow ones taste better, so I've had a little breeding program to do that. And then there's more familiar things around it. You can see Swiss chard and kale. So I'm not robbing you of things you wouldn't know how to eat in the system. I'm just putting a few unusual perennials in to make it go better. Some of those can be, I use an awful lot of fennel seeds in my cooking, so there's a lot of herb fennel through the system. I've also had a breeding program to get the fennels so that I get almost continuous winter growth from them, so they don't die back, so I can use them in a salad system. So basically I found a fennel that was doing really well through the winter and was growing really strong even though, and then I allowed that one to pollinate more than every rest so that its genes are coming. And then if I have a fennel that doesn't do well in the winter, it comes out, so its genes can't go back into the population, and now I have year-round fennel production. And in front of that, the huge umbel with a big kind of plate of a flower is Korean pig celery. It's not a name that's selling itself, is it? But it's a really, really fantastic plant. It, again, is it sort of dies back around about now, actually. Sort of maybe you'll still have some, but it won't be a particularly great-looking plant at the end of October. But by January, it's back up again. So you have this whole new flush of leaves, which you can start harvesting right the way through the Hungry Gap. And it's a kind of strong celery flavour, but the leaves are incredibly soft, so you can use it as a kind of substitute, or you can use it in soups and stews whenever you need a kind of pile of green, but you can also use a bit of its salads, and then its stems, they're never like cultivated celery, but they are good, they are worth eating. So it's an incredibly useful plant full of greens. It is slug-proof, it is drought-proof, it is a wet summer-proof, it will be covered in hoverflies all summer long. It will quite happily self-seed itself. It is bomb-proof, this plant. Like if there is one plant to take to the apocalypse, it is this one. That's a nice picture. Let's not go there. So you can see more dahlias in this, and towards let's see if there's a better picture. No. So in this system, there is actually... Trust me, to choose not great pictures. But the kale that you can see in the back is not actually a kale. It's a 9-star perennial broccoli. So there's both a purple and a white version. These are cauliflowers that are masquerading as sprouting broccoli, essentially. And it's called 9-star because you get a head in the middle and you cut that, and then it gives you loads of side shoots, which will give you kind of sprouting broccoli-like shoots that you can eat in spring. It is a short-lived brassica perennial, so you'll probably have it for about 4 or 5 years, and then you'll notice it will just kind of keel over. But at which point, hopefully, it will have set seed, and you can have saved the seeds, and then you start again. So there's lots of shorter-lived perennials which are incredibly useful to get into the system, not because they're going to be there forever. Like, you wouldn't be able to kill the pig celery. That will be with you for the rest of your life. But the 9-star perennial broccoli, you're going to have an active relationship to keep it in your garden. But, you know, these are much more useful in many different ways than... I'm not denying people purple sprouting broccoli, but that's an intense relationship that you have to be with for sort of, 14 months to get something. Whereas this is a sow it, plant it out, except that it will get cabbage white, except that the pigeons will eat it, except that the slugs will come and eat it, and it won't care. It'll just carry on growing. And the other side, you'll get some food. So I feel like that's a win. This is somebody help me out. This is Korean agastache. Yes, but what's its common name? We can all be there, but Korean mint, but it's something else, isn't it? Korean something mint. Anyhow, lots of you already know it. It is the mecca of bees and hoverflies and butterflies. It will, if it likes you, happily self-seed everywhere. It is a very delicious mint, a sweet mint-flavored leaf that is wonderful as a herbal tea. Even if you think you're not a herbal tea person, I guarantee you're a herbal tea person for this. One of the things about this in herbal medicine is it is anti-inflammatory and it settles your stomach. So it's essentially the hangover cure, this tea. But also you can use the flowers, so you can cut all the flower heads off and then soak them in vinegar and make a vinegar from it, which is also a really delicious, good flavoured vinegar. And using raw cider vinegar to extract lots of flowers for their herbal medicine is a really excellent way to get them into your diet without having to do complicated process. But more to the point, this is one of those joyous plants. Like I say, it will self-seed. Again, it can be quite short-lived, but it will always have self-seeded itself somewhere. You can get a white form. And it's like one of those plants which is really lovely to have in a polyculture because it will kind of take itself over to the corner it needs to be in, and you don't have to worry about it. It won't get attacked by slugs. It will provide you something nice to put into a teapot. You probably won't eat much more of it than that, but it will be doing so much for the ecosystem of the garden. So it flowers all summer long. And one of the things about species plants flowering rather than, say, cultivated ones is that their nectar tends to be more available for pollinators on many different days. So this is a really good source of bringing in your pollinators and your other beneficial insects without you having to do much work, and it will just effortlessly make your garden look nice. This is an old favorite. This picture is taken in Norway. I actually traveled to Norway to get hold of this plant because it was so hard to get it. Like this picture is probably almost 20 years old. And I had to travel out to Norway to meet lovely Stephen Barstow to get hold of this seed. This is Hablitzia tamnoides, or Caucasian mountain spinach. You can now get it from quite a few nurseries. Edulous will definitely have it. Incredible Edibles down in Ashburton will have it. And it is, like, I mean, you're looking at it thinking, why is she waxing lyrical about this green thing that's growing up a side of a shed? Well, because it only wants to grow in deep shade. Like if you put this in too much sun, it goes yellow and disappears. I mean, the root system won't disappear. It will just turn out to be growing along the thing until it can find some shade. But it is an incredibly useful edible plant because it wants to be in deep shade. It is incredibly tough and robust once it's settled its roots in, so it doesn't mind a drought, it doesn't mind a cold winter. No amount of frost can kill this thing off. And it will actually come and grow up out through the snow if you're in a kind of place which would get snow. And you use it as a spinach substitute. And you can probably make 3 or 4 cuttings in the beginning of spring, and then you have to stop to let it to grow. You forget about it. It scrambles up your garage, your apple tree, I don't know, whatever you're trying to hide at the bottom of your garden. In the deep shade, you think nothing of it. And then next spring, when you think, oh, I've got nothing to eat, you go down, and there it is with its lovely leaves. It's truly, you truly learn to love it. It's got these, and you can't really see from that picture, but it's got these lovely heart-shaped leaves. It's a pretty tough, wonderful thing. The Victorians were really into it, and the reason why I had to travel to Norway, and they were particularly into it into kind of Northern Europe, so Norway and Sweden and places like that, because it is so winter hardy. And it sort of dropped off the face of the earth until someone sent a botanist into Russia to go and find it growing in the wild and bring it back. So that's how it's got back into cultivation. And the reason why there wasn't much of it for a long time is that the seed needs to go through this complicated stratification before it germinates. But thankfully, there are good nurseries prepared to do that, so now you can actually go and buy it rather than having to bug me for a cutting. So that is 9-star perennial broccoli. Actually, a cauliflower. And you can see its tiny, cauliflower ancestry. And you can see in the middle, you get this one fairly massive compared to sprouting broccoli. I mean, it's about this big. And then you cut that off, and then it sprouts around the side. The perennial brassicas are my deep love. They are my favourite friends. I have tons of them, and I'm crossbreeding them with everything else. And they are a really interesting group. They have their ancestry, so all of these still have their wild ancestors very much in their gene pool right now. And what that means is they have very ugly knees. So they're very knobbly looking plants. 5 minutes, okay. I'm going to go on to my favourite one. This is it. They're very, very knobbly looking plants. So you have to plant densely around them or else you'll see. And they flop all over the place. And when they flop too much, you just chop the whole plant back hard and then it will reflush. This is a perennial kale. Incredible Edibles and Totnest has an extraordinary amount of in perennial kales. If they take one thing away from this rather eccentric talk, is that you want a perennial kale in your life. They are delicious. They will offer you year-round food. This year, the cabbage white ate the whole of this plant down to just single stems, and it resprouted again 3 weeks later, unbothered, and in fact, I would say slightly more delicious. This one's called Dobbington kale. It's a variegated form. Incredible Edible has one that she calls her best purple perennial kale. The flavour of that kale is unbelievable. But I particularly like this kale because I make a salad, so I eat a lot of raw kale in salads. So you pick all the kale, the nice, soft, they're smaller leaves than, big kales. They're about this big. And I massage it with honey and salt and lemon and let them sit, and then dress that with olive oil. And honestly, it is a fine kale. I've never met anybody who doesn't love this salad. Put nuts and all sorts of other things on it. And we eat tons of that all the way through the winter. And I have had one plant that I got from Stephen Barstow in Norway almost 20 years ago. And I've just taken cuttings of that plant. I've taken it, I've given it to everybody. It's in every garden I've ever been in. And it has never failed me. All year round, it will give me food. And so that's one of the reasons why it's really worthwhile to have perennial vegetables, is they are low maintenance. But below ground, what's happening by having this stable root system underneath it is it means that So essentially what you need to think about your soil is that it needs to be active all year round. And if you've just got an annual vegetable garden, and let's say now you're pulling all your crops in, and maybe you've got one or two winter crops, but you're going to have bare beds, and you shouldn't keep them bare, so you just put mulch of them. That's fine. It's not a bad system. I'm glad you've mulched them. But the microbial community has to go into stasis while there's nothing growing. And that means in spring, when you get going again, all the microbes that you need for your plant's resilience, they have to wait until those roots are out, and those roots are sending sugars to get going again. So they have to build themselves up. If you can keep your soil growing year round, the microbial community is being kept fed year-round, so they are ready and there for you. So it is always better to grow weeds in the winter than it is to have bare ground. However pleasing it looks to you, your soil is literally crying for some growth because it's missing an essential part. Soil never wants to be bare. It wants to be clothed in something green, and that is why many weeds can be green through the winter, because they are fulfilling that essential role. Now, if you hate weeds, put perennial vegetables in that place, because these perennial vegetables will be ticking over all winter. Some of them will be actively growing, and most of them will be ticking over during the winter. And that ticking over will keep your soil in good health. And if your soil is in good health, your pollinators are in good health. And if your pollinators are in good health, your beneficial insects are in good health. And if they're in good health, your bird population is in good health. And your food that you're going to eat is in good health, because you don't have to use so many inputs. And so by having just a few of these plants in your system, you're going to keep your entire garden in much better fettle. I cannot recommend Incredible Edibles in Ashburton enough. She is a small nursery, so she will have waiting lists for many of these things. You'll have to find her on Instagram or online and see when she's putting stuff up. I think Hugh Richards is also now doing quite a lot of stuff online, so you can go get him. And Edulus is fantastic. Ruthlessly hunt out for nurseries that don't overgrow in polytunnels. Polytunnels are fantastically good places to raise things, but those plants aren't as actively strong as plants grown outside. So go off and hunt and find your small local nursery that is growing this stuff outdoors, because they will be growing stuff that's hardier. And always remember that from any plant grown anywhere outside of your garden, there's going to be a time of adjustment while it moves from its soil system, whether that's compost-based or not, to yours. So you have to be kind to things that are moving in. And actually, that kindness... Oh, we've got to finish. So just be kind.
It is hot, isn't it? Yeah. We're all warming. Before we do questions, for anybody that was scribbling really fast and thought, I missed that broccoli, and which one was the Korean kale, Alys has 6 books in the bookshop, which is the teepee, as you go out on the right-hand side. And at 2:00, she's signing them. So, yeah, there was an audible ooh. So, head that direction for 2:00, and it'll save that scrappy note that you made on the back of the envelope you can't quite read. It'll all be there. So questions. We have lots of people with questions, and they're also holding seeds. So you get a question, you even get seeds. Let's start with this gentleman here.
I'd like to know where am I going to grow my potatoes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it is a really good question, where you're going to grow your potatoes. I actually grow my potatoes in amongst everything. So I definitely have a sense of where there's a root system that won't mind a bit of disturbance, and where there's a root... Like, if you try and put your potatoes next to your globe artichokes have nice fleshy roots. They do not want to meet your potatoes. But you'd be surprised how good potatoes go next to next to all sorts of, anything that's clearly annual, but also, so I grew a very successful crop of potatoes next to blackcurrants this year. So to some amount, I put them into the system, and I am also quite lazy about not taking too many up and leaving quite a few volunteers, and then just allowing the volunteers to adapt. So you can shout at me all you want for how I might be putting disease through. I'm fine with that system. I think volunteers work really well. And then I think if you have a really small space, ultimately it's worthwhile growing potatoes in pots, particularly if you want salad and early ones, because you can get them through that system. I recycle so much of my compost, so I am not buying in volumes upon volumes of compost every year. It's too expensive if you're going to grow in pots. So if I grow potatoes in pots, I'll take all of that soil, put it back in, I'll take the potato haulms, I'll put them at the bottom of the pot, and then I'll grow a green manure in the top, a very quick growing one. I'll maybe then put 2 inches of fresh compost, and so something in mid to late summer for the winter in them. So I do a huge amount of green manures in pots. But potatoes, either you love potatoes so much you're just going to make a block somewhere else, but please don't make too many blocks, or I just weave them in and out. And you just have to have a bit of an eye for the notion that if they've died back, you're going to remember where they are.
Marvellous. OK, we've got so many questions that, we're getting mics to people in advance. Away you go.
Hello. Recently, we have acquired a little piece of land, and we would like to grow a nursery and an orchard. And we wanted to do kind of a guild of that with many different plants, but also we want a walnut tree. However, we've been finding out that they don't really like to live with other plants.
No.
So what is your
No,
advice?
I mean, a walnut has got very strong ideas about its neighbours, which isn't true that it doesn't want to live with anybody else, but underneath its canopy it's going to be very hard about its communication. So you just need to put it in a corner. I mean, it is a corner plant. It is not in the middle of the garden. And you accept that it's not, but not much is going to grow underneath. One of the way I always think about this, because you always, if you've ever traveled through Russia or Kazakhstan or anything, you will always see there's walnuts by people's houses. They're literally planted next door to the house so they can get the nuts as quickly as possible. And it becomes quite a useful shady place. That's also where people sit underneath. So because nothing's going to grow underneath it, it becomes a very good place to have your dinner table, your table, or even it's just your chair for your coffee or whatnot. So kind of consider it your friend. Maybe it's not friends with the rest of the guild, but it is your friend, and you can have a nice time underneath it. So that's what that relationship is about.
Perfect, thank you. Lady up the far end.
Hello, thanks. What about growing asparagus in amongst all of this? Have you tried that?
Yeah, it doesn't work. That is the truth of the matter. I mean, asparagus in its natural state wants to be on some sort of sand dune so maybe if you could make it a really sandy thing. It is the one thing I've never I've done so many versions where I'm going to put asparagus dotted through and it's going to be this beautiful ferny thing. It's going to look so aesthetically pleasing. No, it never works. You lose the asparagus in 2 years. So you're either going to have a dedicated asparagus bed, nothing wrong with that. If you love asparagus, it makes a lot of sense. Or a dedicated asparagus patch. But the asparagus that we know as cultivated asparagus has been bred to not have any competition as it's coming up. And to find a system where that's not happening in your garden is, particularly if it's a small garden, is complicated. So I can see in a large garden you could probably make a patch. Or you could go back to sowing Colossus giant, which is the open pollinated one that you can get seeds from. It's really easy to seed. We've all bought into this thing that we have to buy in expensive thongs, but actually you can sow it and you get plants very quickly. And then actually have a breeding program. So actively sow 3 or 4 different seed companies' packets, plant them out, see who copes, seed save off them, start again. So, I mean, it's a longer term thing, but it's more fun maybe.
Marvellous.
Hi, Alice. Thank you so much for your talk. I really enjoyed it. It's really inspiring. I'm going to try and incorporate some veg.
Where are they?
Here.
Where's here?
She's up this way. Alice, right by the...
Oh, hi.
I wanted to ask about you saying about eating dahlias. I wondered if there was a particular type, or if you can just do it with any old Sarah Raven kind of thing, and what you actually do with them when you cook them.
100% they vary massively in flavour. You do not want to eat any that you have bought off someone who cannot... You need someone to tell you that they have been 100% organically grown. If they are not organically grown ones, they are without doubt going to have neonicotinoids in their system because they are perennial and there's a long shelf life of that. Neither you nor your system wants that. So you need to find organic ones. And then I dig them up in the autumn, much like you would potatoes. I whack one of them back in so that they are there, but you could also, save them traditionally as you would in your garage or whatever you're doing. I mostly grate them and turn them into a sort of burger. So I grate them, fry them with garlic and onions and stuff like that gently, so they're just starting to cook, and then I take that mush and pack it and bind it with an egg and make a dahlia burger out of them. But traditionally they would have been used a lot in soups. So they are they are not the flavour of a potato, but they are sort of starchy like a potato, but they wouldn't roast like a potato. You have to go on your own dahlia journey. I tasted a dahlia burger in Ireland and was like, this is a genius vegan burger. I'm not vegan, but this is a genius vegan burger. Well, and I'm not vegan because I put an egg in it. But this is a genius burger. I'm going to start doing this. And I found that's the easiest way. So they're not a huge part of our diet. They're just a little bit of our diet. But this is the other thing. I think people get hell-bent on trying to be self-sufficient or provide all their food. That's quite complicated. You need a lot of space for that, and it probably means you're in the garden all the time and not with your friends. We need people. What you want to try and do is have one meal a day from your garden. Even if that's just a sprinkling of seeds on your breakfast, that is entirely valid. And if you stick to that rule that you eat something from your garden every day, you'll be making a huge difference to your environmental impact. And you will still have a social life.
There's a question at the back. 2 questions. Okay, who's first?
How did you deal with the bindweed in your Birmingham garden?
So I just did that lasagna technique. And people never believe me, but it works. The lasagna technique is essentially like a kickstart. I mean, it's a kind of... Charles Dowding does a similar thing with his... what you're doing is making So the cardboard is going to suppress light, but the bindweed is way more beefy than that, so it doesn't care. But what it's going to do is grow through your wet cardboard and then find this rich organic layer of matter, and it's going to get really excited and grow too fast because it's suddenly in a food source. And then as it comes out, you will find that your soil will be really loose, and you can just with a hand fork pull the whole thing up and out. So you're basically making it believe that it's got a good time, which is going to weaken it, and then you're going to pull it out. You have to do this regularly. That doesn't go away. But these are just like little stems coming out, and all of those stems you chuck into a bucket full of water with a lid or another bucket on top of it, so you can make a really smelly anaerobic soup, which you can then water back on the garden. So you're not losing, a plant as clever and as strong as bindweed knows a thing or two about your subsoil and is pulling up all sorts of great minerals that you want on your surface levels. So you do not want to waste it by putting it in the green manure. If you do not want to make smelly weed soup and you have a garage or a shed, particularly with a tin roof, whack the whole plant onto the tin roof on a hot day and it will fry and dry out, and then you can just brush it off and put that into your compost. Do not put any little bit of bindweed in your compost alive, because you are just giving it a huge bed to grow in.
Thank you. Last question.
Thank you. Are there particular soft fruits which work very, very well in this particular type of gardening?
I think all of the bush soft fruits. So, I have, I grow my blueberries in the ground. Blueberries, everybody thinks blueberries need acidic soil, and they do, but they will also adapt to non-acidic soil as long as you give them some sort of acidic mulch every once in a while. It just takes them a couple of years. So you have to put them in and expect them to sort of not be too settled, and then suddenly you'll realize that they've adapted. So I grow a lot of blueberries, a lot of black currants, white currants, less white currants and red currants, because clearly you can only eat so many of those, but a lot of black currants. I grow a lot of gooseberries in all sorts of different ways. So in the back fence, I grow gooseberries as cordons. I've also started to have a huge problem with squirrels in that garden eating all the apples before they were ripe. I got so angry with that, and somebody was like, but they don't have opposable thumbs. I was like, what? And I was like, the only way a squirrel can taste whether something's right or not is to take a bite. So that's why they take a bite and chuck it. They're not being stupid. They just can't they can't squeeze it. I was like, oh, I've been mean about squirrels. Anyhow, squirrels were eating them, and so what I did by accident was I sort of lost interest in pruning one of my gooseberries, and I actually just started growing up through around the trunk of the tree and up through it into this kind of wild bush. And I realized how much a gooseberry can grow and how if you can give it something to lean into. And then, of course, the squirrels couldn't run up and down the stems because there was a thorny gooseberry, and I was like, I am a genius. And then the gooseberry was like, no, I am a genius, and you are lazy. So lots of gooseberries, black currants, blueberries, some raspberries that I sort of let run all over the garden, which many people couldn't cope with, but I try and grow them like in the kind of back of the border, and then accept that there will be time that I regret that because they've just run all the way through the system. But what I also do is make sure that the raspberries are allowed to move around. Raspberries naturally send out runners to new ground because that's how they're sort of pioneer plants, and they move through the edge of the woodland looking for new sources of food, and we keep them in one space, and that actually makes them very unhappy, which is why you get yellow-looking raspberries and you have to put tons of compost. If you can grow them somewhere where you can just allow them to move on, they will naturally just move endlessly, and the last lot will eventually die back. So if you've got a kind of woodlandy but sunny enough space, I would let them run wild through that. And then I grow like an amount of Joster, Worcester, those hybrids. They can get very big, but I have, like, towards the back of the garden, a bit where I basically don't want people to climb through, so I've allowed them to grow. I am quite lax. Like, the cordons I'm really into, and everybody else, I just let them do their thing until they've got too big, and then I chop them back. These are plants that will happily regenerate endlessly. Don't worry too much about pruning. But what I also do is accept that because it's a perennial system, when everything's mixed in together, they're never going to be caged. So I have to put enough in the system that I accept that the birds get their share and I get my share. I know most people have a freezer full of red currants from last year that they then defrost, compost, and put new red currants in and freeze for another year. I am more than happy to let the birds have their fair share of everything because they are my garden and my garden is theirs. So I am much more loose about, as long as I get some, they get plenty, we're all cool. Every now and again, I have words with them. Can I just have a bit? And if there's like a blueberries, and I'm really into the blueberries, I might chuck a bit of EnviroMesh over that one just to save it. But I really am, and really practice a kind of point of being generous with the other beings. Like if they want to eat something, they're hungry. They get to eat it. I don't buy in birdseed. I make a garden that is enough for everyone. And I think that's a really nice way to be. And whenever there's a blackbird who's been eating my strawberries all over the place. Just allow them. They're a kind of ground cover that can run all over and along the edges of the paths and all of that. And there was a blackbird who was eating every strawberry I seem to have ever grown. And I said to her this year, like, God, couldn't you just leave me one? I mean, what you just, like, right now, all you do is do exactly what you're the strawberry thief, and you never do anything else. And as I said this, she went into a bush, and I was like, see, you're doing something well. I had a stupid conversation with her, and she came out with a huge slug, which she whacked on the ground and ate. And I was like, okay, pointing. You know more than I do.
Marvellous. On that fabulous note, I think Alys gets to go.